Amanda, it's great to have you on the Kaiser Human Performance Podcast. Thank you for being here with me today. How are you?
I'm so good. Thanks for having me, Gabe. I've been looking forward to this.
Absolutely. So I have to ask, I've come to learn that you are somewhat of like a mountain biker. Is that right?
Yes, I am a mountain biker. Sometimes more, sometimes more serious, sometimes more for fun. But yeah, I love mountain biking, and I try to do at least one race per year. So that gets into like sometimes I'm taking it more seriously.
Oh, wow. So a Midwesterner, born Midwesterner, but now you've been in Arizona for 25 years. All you're missing the Midwest?
I love the Midwest. I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, and still have family back in Indiana. My mom's still back there. Every time I go back, I'm like, man, I miss this so much. I wonder if I could live here again. But then I get back to Arizona and I love it too. So yeah, I'm always nostalgic. I always love going back, and it always is in my mind. But Arizona's home.
Got it. Maybe go back and enjoy a St. Elmo's shrimp cocktail.
Oh, you have to. I mean, if you haven't had a St. Elmo's shrimp cocktail, you haven't lived. And if you've had one before, you know exactly what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. And I'm not going to give too much detail because if you haven't and you go to Indy, you get that shrimp cocktail, you dip it, and you just put it in your mouth, and then you'll know you've lived.
I love it. We're gonna have to schedule a second episode that we can just discuss maybe food across the country. So,
Yes, please. Yeah. I mean, I am a dietitian, by trade. So, whenever you want to talk about the food, more than happy.
that's great. So Amanda, you've been with Exos for over 2 decades now. As you mentioned, you've been in Arizona for quite some time, leading innovation in human performance. Can you start by sharing a bit about your journey and your role as Chief Performance Innovation Officer there?
Yeah. So, gosh, it has just been an awesome 21 years at Exos. So, starting kind of way back at the beginning, I did my undergrad in nutritional science and was looking for a place to go do a master's that focused on sports nutrition at the time, which really wasn't a thing yet. And but I found a great program at Florida State and was on the track to do sports nutrition masters, finished all my rotations to become a sports dietitian. And along the way, I found myself and one of my other, friends at Florida State carrying on and doing another master's in exercise physiology. And like that was just the best. I loved it. It just unlocked a whole nother world that I couldn't get enough of. So I ended up doing an internship on the strength and conditioning side. I finished up the nutrition and finished up the XPhys coursework and landed myself at Athletes Performance to do a strength and conditioning internship. And in the midst of that, toward the end, Mark Verstegen was like, "Wait, you're a dietitian too?" I was like, "Yes." And so at that time, it was just the location in Arizona, and I was super lucky to be able to join them in 2003 as the nutrition manager, research coordinator. But I was also, taking athletes and training groups. I was doing a little bit of all of it. So that's how it began. And
Right.
now, 2 decades later, it's just been, taking on different roles, doing different things, and now leading innovation for Exos means, how are we pioneering the industry leading solutions that Exos has become known for, and how do we continue to do that? And it's an incredible team with awesome subject matter experts. So all of our methodology leads from sports science to neuroscience to nutrition and training. We have a research team that's taking on really cool external projects, across different types of industries. We've got our coach training team that is upskilling all of our, almost 3,000 practitioners globally. We've got a team that is focused all on performance design and works with our tech team. Like, how do you bring methodology to life within a digital and a physical experience? And then lastly, a really fun futures function that is, really thinking about, gosh, like what's happening not just 1 to 3, but even 5 to 7 years out in this world of human performance. So
So cool. So it sounds like, right, you have these multiple verticals within innovation, right? And you have,
yeah.
it seems like a lot of teams. So my question for you, is this all housed in Arizona? Is this across all of your facilities? Like, how do you manage all of this and where are these teams located?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about Exos, as a as a business, like Exos is, we're a coaching company, and our mission is to help humans be ready for the moment that matters in work, sport, and life. So, from an Exos business perspective, we have part of our business that is hyper focused on elite athletes in sport, and that's also inclusive of military. We've got a part of our business that focuses on education for industry practitioners, but then the biggest part of our business is actually in the corporate wellness space. So how are we helping employees and corporations, think about load management like we do on the athlete side, but for their employees. So that's the innovation team is a centralized function. So we, have to think about, all right, what's really needed in sport, what's really needed in employer, and we know that humans are humans, but their experiences are slightly different because they play on different types of fields. So that's what the innovation team, that's how they have to think in multiple dimensions. But yeah, each of those functions, some of us are here in Arizona, there's a chunk of us that are here, but we've got our SVP of methodology is based in Canada, and our neuroscience senior director is based in Canada. We've got some people in Philly, we got some people in Florida. So I don't know. Although we have a nice group here in Arizona, we're really a spread out, diverse team.
Awesome. You mentioned having some research teams and a lot of these different verticals being part of Exos. How much of the research that you're doing and attempt to innovate is you going out and looking at other organizations and what other organizations around the world are maybe doing versus what you're doing internally and how you can improve your own processes, right? Like how much are you pulling from other organizations into yours?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question and an interesting perspective. So, like, it's kind of hard not to absorb from other organizations because we're working with so many different organizations. So it's like, how can we not absorb what JP Morgan Chase is doing and thinking
Hmm.
about in the world of employee experience as a leading financial firm? Or how can we not think about how Google's innovating in their processes by the work we're doing with them? And then it's like our relationship with Kaiser. Like, you guys are doing awesome things. We've got relationships with Shiftwave and other really progressive companies. So I think there's not a strategic approach to how are we like getting out there and learning from others. It's really organic in the work
Right.
that we're doing. Um, but we are really passionate about making sure that the programming that we're deploying or the experiences that we're bringing to life, either in sport or in the corporate world, are efficacious. And so, like, we are based in evidence, we're based in data, we are based in science. And then how do we bring to life that magical experience? So it is a core focus for us.
Yeah, it's cool because you mentioned, corporate wellness being such a big pillar. So I imagine, like you mentioned, Google and JP Morgan, Chase, you have this exposure to other disciplines that maybe people who are in sport performance, and I know you work with different populations, but maybe people who are in sport performance don't always have access to. So to be able to pull in from them ideologies, processes, systems makes for like a really cool opportunity with refining your wellness programs or strength conditioning or performance programs.
Yeah, we're learning all the time. I mean, and especially like you said, it doesn't like appear that it would you'd translate that over, but how these companies, like you said, run their processes, run their business, think about systems
Hmm.
is so fascinating because you and I, like, we are passionate about helping humans become better, and so are companies, and so are teams, and so are leagues, and so there is just this incredible kind of merging between just the world out there helping humans be better. And it doesn't matter whether it's in work or sport or life. There's things to learn from all of it that we get to apply.
So, how often are you revisiting your systems and processes and refining these? Is this an everyday thing? Do you have certain points of the year where you sit down and bring everybody together and say, hey, here's what we found over the last few months or year, and here are the changes we're going to make? it's a balance between like you don't want to just be changing things just to change things. You want to be intentional about it, but also you're constantly trying to evolve, I suppose. So just curious if you can expand on that.
Yeah, we definitely have a process in place, and I'd say, that process is really solidified over the last 5 years. So, about 5 years ago, we took a really focused approach in making sure that we were clearly articulating our model of human performance. And that was really important for our organization because it is so broad and it is so diverse. We have to make sure that everyone in the organization can understand that foundational model, understand the nomenclature around it, understand how that drives the various experiences. And so that's really what started us on, a more consistent approach to how are we thinking about upgrading. So we started there, and then, about a year later, we started to really hone in on like what should our innovation process look like, and we decided, we landed on this concept of innovation arcs, because innovation can get really broad, and like you can be changing or tinkering or tweaking without, tweaking things without it like mapping back to strategy. So these innovation arcs helped us focus. And so we chose those based on kind of where we thought the industry was going, where we saw different needs in our own business, kind of what were learning from, our customers, and, just the industry at large. And so we landed on those, and that's been really helpful. So all of our innovation and how we're thinking about evolving has systematically been, a part of one of those arcs.
Great. I think it's an appropriate time to maybe dive into each of them. And I guess we can have an overview of the four that you mentioned. And then from there, we can kind of spend some time maybe in each one and maybe hear about the value of each. So I guess if you were to say, okay, here are our four arcs, which, what are those?
Yeah, so the four arcs are, again, like slightly broad and diverse, but they have helped to anchor us. The
Sure.
first one is data-driven coaching. So this is like, really thinking about how we utilize data to transform the coaching experience, create motivation, and, truly kind of monitor, and then, close that coaching loop to help individuals continue to progress. So data driven coaching is the first arc. The second arc is all around women. And so, again, we decided on these arcs about 4 years ago, and you can see just like, women's performance has grown significantly. So I'm so glad we were committed to that early on. So it is, a combination of research and protocols and programming all around how to help women optimize their performance throughout the menstrual cycle and throughout their life cycle. So including perimenopausal transition type of work. That's been super transformative. The third arc is around the future of work. And so again, like we're working with 154 companies and in helping them think about like what what does the future of employee performance and productivity look like? And so that was all kind of, layered into this future of work arc. And we did a lot of work around, developing flow state, a lot of work around team dynamics, and, how that impacts employee, individual, and organizational performance. So a lot of really cool work in there that's, like I said, translated into now like this concept of load management. And then our fourth innovation arc is all around the power of teams. And this arc was inspired actually by our sport business. And so when we train athletes for the combine, they're actually there right now in Indianapolis, back in the hometown, eating some shrimp cocktail at St. Elmo's. Hopefully not before they run the 40, but that is it. The power of teams was inspired by our training of combine athletes. We always train athletes in groups. And so there was something magical that happens in the combine training as these incredible athletes come from different teams, and they're all vying for their position in the NFL draft, but they come together and they create their own team as they're training together for this event. So we started to do tons of work on team dynamics and how that could translate into other environments. So those are the four, bodies of work that we've been innovating around.
That's great. Thank you for breaking that down. I appreciate it. It's so cool. We can dive into each one and we will. I'm thinking about which order to go, and I actually kind of want to start with future of work.
Yeah.
Um, because it's a little more applicable right now with people starting to return back to office. And I know you do a lot of work in corporate wellness. So I'm actually curious to know what it was like when employees were kind of sent home and required to stay at home, how you innovated and evolved during that time to continue to be a resource. I'm just curious to hear about that because you started all these arcs, it sounded like you said 4 to 5 years ago.
Yep.
So I'm kind of interested to hear like what that was like with people being back home and how you can continue to be, supportive and provide resources. And then now we're seeing this maybe it's like slow transition back into work and maybe how you're thinking about all that.
Yeah, it was that's the exact timing. So, we took that time to really start to think about, well, how do we develop programming that is just out, it's opening the aperture. It's outside of the traditional training moment that we were, really known for, and what we were predominantly doing in that business, like managing the performance centers or the fitness centers, really executing that programming. And at that point we were forced to really think about, well, what else could we do? And we were actually starting to like study the effects of burnout, and we were recognizing the impact of burnout before COVID even hit. And like that just that timing made for a really incredible opportunity to just accelerate that work. So we hired our senior director of neuroscience. We invested in some resourcing around performance psychology, and we really started to think about, well, how would we program in the corporate space to help individuals, teams, and organizations really think about amplifying performance above the neck. And so that led into different types of workshops and experiences that are all around recovery and individual recovery and group recovery and what that means to performance in the workplace, creating psychological safety and belonging. What does that mean in the workplace? Then thinking about how do you really create an environment for flow state, and what does that mean, and how do you bring that to life? So it was the perfect time for us, and it gave us a space to really think about bringing that programming to life. And we just continue to iterate. And we did some studies with Hofstra University. We did a study with the Wharton School of Business and Adam Grant, and we just continued to learn and have ultimately landed on how we can help organizations really think about um, the concepts of load management, because that's what burnout is. It's the chronic mismanagement of job demands and job resources. Just like with an athlete, it's the chronic mismanagement of load. And so it's allowed us to now be, having those conversations with this different perspective, with these different solutions, and connecting the brain and the body more meaningfully to help employees and orgs uh, think about human performance of the next chapter.
That's terrific. That's really awesome. And to hear the research that you're doing with these other organizations, excuse me, leveraging relationships with them is really awesome. So as you think about how you can help others externally, are you also then looking back at your own environment and be like, like I think there are some things we can maybe change here too.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And that was the intention of the work that we did with Adam Grant and the Wharton School of Business. Right? Like we did a deep dive looking at our own culture. And so, we launched an entire new way of working. We completely transformed the way that we work, thinking about taking on a more, like I said, pro recovery approach. And so we looked at the concepts of autonomy within our workday. We changed our meeting times, like in making sure that we were incorporating the right levels of break. So 50-minute meetings, 10-minute intentional break after. Any meetings that are, longer than 90 minutes require at least 20-minute break. And so we started to really think about how you set the calendars of all of us that are working to make sure that there's that appropriate recovery built in. We have now a You Do You Friday, which is some people utilize that for full recovery. Some people are utilizing that to catch up on other types of work, but it's really embracing that level of autonomy. So it was really enlightening in so many different ways. And our own or company's levels went way down. Our entire company was learning how to create the environment to do more focused work, and their abilities and beliefs that they could do that also increased significantly. And they just felt like they were more engaged. They felt more productive. And we continued to measure our business metrics, and those were improving. And yeah, so there was a lot of goodness that came out of that. But you're absolutely right. Like we had to point it on ourselves to make sure that one, these theories hold up. But two, I mean, if we're a human performance company, we have to continue to evolve and see how you actually make that come to life.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell me more about this You Do You Friday.
Yeah, I mean I mean, some people will call it like the 4-day work week, but
Yeah.
we didn't want to call it that. We really wanted to brand it You Do You Friday. And so all of that what I just talked about is incorporated in our readiness culture code. And that You Do You Friday, again, like we don't schedule meetings internally. We don't schedule meetings on Fridays unless you have to. We really respect individuals' autonomy to be able to do the work that they need to do uninterrupted, or take the recovery that they need uninterrupted. So that's the intention of the You Do You Friday. Now, I mean, the reality is things come up, right? Sometimes they're traveling, there's a client meeting, there's something urgent that we have to work on, but that used to be the norm. Now that's the exception. And I think that's like the important distinction. And our employee base is more recovered, more engaged, and more productive as a result.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think we had a Kaiser Education series episode. We had from Volt Dan Giuliani, and I think he also adopted a 4-day work week, called it Flex Fridays,
Yeah.
and said the feedback from his employees was awesome. Production levels went way up, which was also cool to hear.
Yeah, and the majority of the team is doing some type of work, on
Sure.
that Friday, but it takes on a different connotation. So again, the intention behind it was like, how do you really embrace autonomy, flexibility, and recovery, knowing
Hmm.
that those are three critical things to solving the burnout equation. And
Right.
yeah, so that's a You Do You Friday.
I
That's
like
tomorrow,
it.
by the way.
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. So, question for you. When it comes to, okay, you finish this research with Wharton, you're ready to implement this. Is it direct messaging then? Like, how do you filter down this messaging of, hey, this is what we'll be adopting moving forward? Is it just an easy message? Is it something that you slowly tried to change over time? Or is it like, hey, how do you translate what you found into practice?
Yeah, so we with Wharton, it was a bit of a different order. And so we had like the thought process on the intervention, which was the readiness culture code. And so in all of those different elements, and then we studied it with Wharton, and then we start to extract various components, or double down on certain things that we really see are creating an impact. But when you're rolling out uh, something of that scale, especially in the corporate world, what we learned most is that it has to start at the top. Like, this cannot be just something that you talk about doing or you talk about implementing. Like, you need senior leaders to be committed to showing up and embracing this new way of working. And that is the most critical piece. Then, because we're modeling what is important to us and how we value different components. Then we called it the code for a reason, because there's something about a code. It's a code of trust. Like it's just the way that we operate. And so that just distinction of a word was really important because now this is like how we respect each other and how we operate as a team. And then making sure that we all have resources and the tools and tactics available. So that's important for any type of broad-based rollout within a corporation. But we found some things from that study with Wharton that were not. I would say they weren't shocking, but they created a different perspective on how we talk about some of these drivers of human performance and how they're relevant in the workplace. So we found really strong correlations. I know these are human performance people on the that are listening, so it's not shocking, but it is shocking in this space. And so, if you are properly fueled, if you can tap into flow state more, if you feel like you have better cardiovascular fitness, if you are waking in the morning feeling rested, what we found in the study with Wharton is each of those are significantly correlated to productivity at work, to feeling engaged at work, to elements of belonging at work, and then clearly parts of burnout. But it helped us cross the chasm between, hey, we're going to help humans be better, but actually we're going to help humans be better in the work that they have to do at work. And I think that's like the future of human performance in the workplace. Is you can see it translate in sport. It's like, is the athlete running faster? Is the athlete catching more passes? Is the athlete able to run the route more effectively? You can see that start to translate now in parallel in the corporate space.
Awesome. Thanks for diving into that one. That was great. I think the next one I want to target now is high performing women in sport, in work, and in life. You mentioned that you felt that you were pretty early to this, especially 5 years ago. We've seen a rapid, you know, increase in viewership and coverage in women's athletics. And you also mentioned some of the work that you're doing with postmenopausal as well earlier on, which I know is an important piece right now of performance as well. As I mentioned to you off air, I did an episode recently with Pat Van Galen. She's really passionate in that area as well. So tell me a little bit about this arc.
Yeah. So again, we just saw this as a huge opportunity. We felt socially and emotionally connected to the need, 4 or 5 years ago, uh, and and we were just excited to really dive into the work, and and part of that is just like changing the cultural norms and the cultural expectations. And I think that's one of the biggest changes that's happened. And I remember sitting in a room, with the team and saying, hey, like, as a part of this, like, we want, women and coaches of women, no matter what their gender is, to understand the menstrual cycle, to understand the phases, to what is the relationship like between kind of male female coaches, and how can we break down some of those insecurities around understanding and learning and acknowledging the menstrual cycle and the phases and how that translates into training. So that just normalization of the conversation is one of the things I am just so excited about. And it's talking about cycle, talking about perimenopause is no longer nearly, if at all, taboo as it was 5 years ago. So anyways, we were on a mission to really bring even more of this personalization to life for women or individuals with female physiology. So we had one of my great friends, colleagues, Dr. Stacy Sims. She's on our performance advisory board. So Stacy was consulting with us at the beginning. We created we call them EPOVs, with these new kind of tracks. So in Exos point of view, we created a broad-based kind of review of the literature and where we wanted to point different solutions. And And then we started to test, learn, and apply. So we did, our first pilot of training women based on cycle, taking in, aura data, recovery data, HRV data, and really learning about, how we would deploy that based on, follicular or luteal cycles. So that was really cool. We started to build education, so you can find that education now from Exos and how you can better support, high performing women across the cycle. So both in, just through the menstrual cycle, but then into perimenopause. So we created education for practitioners. Like Michaela Floss has been out there with Bridge Athletic and presenting and, different types of scenarios. So out there really just sharing the education. One of our partners, UFOS, so we did a women specific training event that was sponsored by UFOS, and that was brought to life in the media. That was really awesome to start to tell that story. And then lastly, this is something in the workplace that is also really important. And, how do we start to kind of uncover and showcase that women are don't have access to these types of resources, or understanding how cycle impacts physiology, and how they can show up at work, and how they might want to adjust the way they fuel, or the way they train, or the way they incorporate breath work or cold as a part of optimizing their performance based on cycle. So we have a paper under review right now. So hopefully, at a later date, we can share more, but it's talking about those gaps and what women in the workplace really understand and have access to. And so, yeah, so I mean, it's been kind of, all encompassing, but, as you look at our experiences today, we're refining and relaunching how we train women in our institutes. We've got incredible content around optimizing performance through the menstrual cycle in our Exos app that's available to all of our companies that are in the corporate wellness sector. So you start to see this content and experience coming to life.
That's awesome. It's so exciting too, especially the research paper that's pending, which is really cool.
Yeah.
But that sounds great. And I'm curious, you mentioned education online or resources that are available for anyone who's listening right now, being like, I want to learn more about this, and where can I go find this? Where's a good place for them to maybe find that education?
Yeah, so you can find it on the Team Exos homepage, and there's the education. Just it's within the education aspect of our site. So yeah, you can go in there and take the course, and it's awesome. So.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And you talked about maybe normalizing this with your own staff and your own coaches. So, can you tell me a little bit about the rollout of education? Was it like sessions, workshops? How did you roll out these findings or this education to your own staff, right? So then they can now work with female athletes or female clients, in a better way, a more efficient way, and do that aspect of their job better with that population.
Yeah, so we actually leverage the same education that's available to,
Cool.
practitioners outside. That's really fun part too about Exos. A lot of what we're, developing for externally, we're also utilizing internally. And so, step one for our coaches was, making sure that they're engaging with that content, because that's setting the true foundation of understanding those components. Then from there, we're standardizing what the experience is. So, what are the different assessment pieces? How are we programming differently? What are the ways that we incorporate this into the conversation? So that's the next level of training that gets dripped and rolled out as we launch those new experiences. So that's what's coming up next.
Very cool. So, as you look at this and you evaluate where you were 5 years ago, where you are now, but then also thinking a little bit about where this is headed to you, where is this arc and where is this innovation arc headed?
Yeah, so for us, and then I'll start with us, and then kind of where I think this is going in the future. For us this year, like across all of our arcs, like we've invested in these four arcs, and for us this year, we're really stepping on the gas and putting pressure on ourselves to bring them to life, like get the research out of the paper and get it into the experiences. And so by the end of this year, you'll start to really feel even more of that. So every female athlete that's coming through our our sport experiences will be engaged in kind of that evolution of Exos. Everybody in the app will be able to engage in that content and have coaches that are able to point them to different types of content and have that experience. So that's what we're committed to this year, is going from like the science into, hey, like we're really programming this into the way that we operate. So I think the future of this then is, how does this knowledge become ubiquitous, across anyone who is working with female athletes, but then also for the athletes themselves. So I think about it in two ways. That's been the other really interesting thing, is how much women don't even fully understand their cycle, like, and what the implications are in certain phases of the cycle to recovery and impact to sleep, etc. So I think the future of this arc is really continuing to accelerate the amount of understanding that women have about their own physiology, and that those that are coaching them really understand. And then that starts to completely transform. And it almost becomes like it's such a base knowledge. It's not a new thing anymore. It's just like, well, of course we would think of it like that. So that's what I think the future is.
Very cool. One thing that you said that stood out to me that I really, really liked is said, get it out of the paper and into experience. I thought that was really great.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that's when you love science and data, like I do, and so many of us do in this field. It doesn't matter until you get it into the experiences and really learn from it there. So yeah, you gotta take it off the shelf and put it into play.
It's a good lead into the next one, which we're going to cover power of team. And I feel like with this one, how you described it, you talked about the NFL combine groups and what you were witnessing with their training environment. This feels sort of like the opposite, in that you were looking at experience and asking the question of like, can we find out what's going on paper here? So I feel like a lot of times with the research, right, you ask questions and then go observe. It felt like when you described this one, you're observing and now you're asking the question, like, what are we actually seeing here? Because we know there's something material here.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so this one came from different aspects, and back to the your observation around, well, gosh, so many of these arcs started like around COVID time. Like, how, like, what an interesting time to start these. So I mean, imagine in the corporate space and just in the world, like, people were disconnected, they were quarantined, they were siloed off. And it's like, how do you create community? Like, what is really, like, how do you do that? And what's the playbook for that? And how does that translate digitally? How does it translate physically, which we weren't really even doing? And so that was the approach that we took. And we started to think about what, with our experts in performance psychology and in neuroscience together, what are those components, and how do we bring them to life? And when we started to break it down, I mean, it was a fascinating process. But we had to go through a systematic approach. Like, we needed to really think about, how do we define community? Then, how do we encourage? I mean, this was really to help our business or others that are trying to build it. How do you build community? What's the theory behind community and belonging? So those were, kind of the chapters of this playbook that we developed. And, then we started to think through, well, what are there, where do we have examples of great communities, and how do you actually build communities and experiences? And then lastly, um, how do you think about measuring the power of community? So this whole arc, it was more so providing our own organization with a very specific approach, and how to think about in their environments as they stand up programs, leveraging these concepts and what we felt are like the known truths of building community.
And what did you find out?
Yeah, I mean, we found out, like, there's just um what we found out most, I would say, is team and community like mean everything, but they mean nothing at the same time. And so what we wanted to do is have, some very specific definitions of things. And so, especially between like what is a team and what is a community. And so like when we think about a team, like a team has a specific goal or achievement that they're seeking to make happen versus a community, is there for a shared purpose. And so, how do we really leverage this power of team? We thought about like, well, what's the difference in terms of size? And so, teams can be really large, but teams like we really felt like, had more, about 12 people or so. Thinking about how to join. It's like a community, really, there is no boundary, but when you're really joining a team, like there's criteria. We thought about the concept of like the intimacy of the relationships. And so in communities, like members feel like they belong. And then on teams, like, members are on a true, like people on a true first name basis. And then lastly, I think the other kind of really interesting component there was around structure. And so, we think about community, like the structure of a community is fluid and dynamic, but the structure of a team, because they were, very connected to shared goals, like there's more structure around, tasks and roles and responsibilities. So I think, the big thing that we came out of that is, how do we create this really clear definition? How do we really kind of leverage some of those critical components of creating teams amongst communities to really drive higher levels of performance?
That was great. I'm digesting it here for a second here. Um, okay, so then after you identify these key differences of community and team, it sounds like it's not really one is better than the other necessarily. It's just kind of dependent on your goals and who you're working with. But now that you've kind of organized them under team, you've organized it into community, how do you then put that into practice? Like, how do you identify, okay, we need to create community here, and now we know that we have to also have people identify their teams within that? Like, how do you take that? Let's just take an athlete approach here for a second, maybe even combine. How do you take what you've learned and translate that into practice and implement that into practice?
Yeah, so I think probably the best way, and I'm just like, thinking about how we, actually encapsulated this and shared it out with our organization and thinking about it with athletes and as you bring these groups together, like what are some of the critical factors? And those factors are really inclusive of like, what are we really doing? And they centered around the principles for building belonging. And so as we're trying to set up these, and community can drive belonging, but team can as well, but like how do you really establish that belonging? And so, in this playbook, we started to outline these critical components. And so, first and foremost, making sure that there's a boundary. Like what is the group, like what is that team about? Like what is it that is, what is it that makes that team very special? So there's the definition of what is that team there to do. And so I think you start to see that, like, especially with our combine training, they have a shared goal, they have a shared mission, like they're there for a reason. Another key aspect to building belonging was, having rituals. And so having a ritual within which that team is anchoring to was another really critical thing for individuals that are looking to build community and create that sense of belonging. Having an opportunity where you could share stories about what was happening within that team and amongst each other, that was another critical component. Leveraging symbols and language, so having a very specific language or nomenclature is another critical component that we highlighted. And then having a dedicated space. And so when we're training athletes, like the space is Exos, but when we're thinking about when we're working in other communities, like what is that space where that those athletes or those individuals know that they come for this team? And so how do you think of creating that? And so, it doesn't have to be physical, but it could be digital. But, that's how these things really started to come to life. And, we've seen groups and teams do that in our employer business. We've started to see it come to life in our digital experiences as well. And so, as our team is out there kind of creating the concept of these challenges, when you really kind of look at that, sometimes you're like, oh, well, it's just a challenge. Well, if you can get people together in a shared goal, like within that boundary, if you're then like leveraging that space where there's rituals around it and things that they do together, they're able to share their stories, there's a symbol or a language around it, and they have their own space. Now people feel like they belong. So that's really what we've learned in this community, teams, et cetera, type of approach. It's, how do you create this framework? How do you really think about these known truths, and how do you really drive this sense of belonging?
That's so cool and well explained. So thank you. And I'm going back in my head to memories of going to sports camp. I went, I think maybe for about 15 years, just
Yeah,
like a day camp. And you bring together a group of 30 young kids or 30 people, and all of a sudden you say, you guys are the purple team, you guys are the red team. And all of a sudden, like within a few moments, you're just looking around and you're like, all right, yeah, we are the red team. Like we are the purple team.
right.
And just a few simple exercises within that to get everybody on the same page. I mean, we all walked up to this big circle of 30 people not knowing anybody. And in 2 seconds, you're like, you're my person, just
Yeah,
because of these simple things that
for
you're able to
sure.
implement pretty quickly.
And it made you feel like you belonged. And so,
Yeah.
like, I think like through this arc, it's like, what is that, that kind of performance psychology science that's underpinning a lot of these things, but how can you codify it in a way where, you can take Gabe can take his camp experience and, the concept of ritual and boundaries and symbols and place, and how might coaches like think about that with the communities and then the teams within that they're developing? So it's these very little things that can go a really long way in getting people connected, not only to each other, but connected to the experience in which they're in.
Yeah, it's great. And I like how that one was kind of reverse engineered, where you're like, there's something special happening here. We know we can see it, we can feel it. We've all been a part of a team before, we've been a part of a community, but now let's really dive into this and find out what's really happening here and start to actually define these things, which I really like. So thank you for walking us through that.
Yeah, of course.
The last one here that we have, the fourth, data driven coaching. Okay. So you mentioned previously that this was more about what can we do with data and how do we enhance the coaching experience that in return enhances performance and allows us to kind of close that coaching loop. So I'm curious to hear what you think about the change that's happened in the last 5 years, last 10 years. I mean, we spoke before, data is now everywhere, right? Anywhere you look, someone's collecting data. That's amazing. But the question kind of remains like, cool, you're collecting it, but now what? Right.
Yeah,
That was a couple questions in one, I guess, just maybe hitting on the value of this data driven coaching a little bit more, and then we can kind of dive into that.
for sure. So, we have always believed at Exos, and it's I think it's been something that we've been continuing to bring to life in different ways over the last 20 25 years. How do we think of everybody as an N of one? And what are the components that we need to understand about the human that is in front of us? And how do we understand those different components, and how does that then translate and evolve into what that individual needs to do at certain points of time, for them to achieve their goals? And so that's always been something that's been driving us, here, and how do we continue to push ourselves to think and bring these things to life? And so we had the thought process around the model, which I talked about, our model of human performance, like that is a really important piece. And so to your point around today, like there's data everywhere. Like, so you've got performance assessment data, you've got foundational assessment data, you've got load data, you've got, sleep data. The data goes on and on. But if you can't bring that data in and make sense of that data to create a really compelling so what, now what, then it's just data for data's sake. And so I think, as we've continued to really uh, be thoughtful around how we're building kind of this future foundation of like the next chapter of Exos, sometimes less, starting with less data is better because you can continue to increase those compelling so what, now what, but the without the model, without a framework, data is just data, and it's just data for data's sake. And I think that's the most important thing that we've known, but has become even more true as technology has caught up with the methodology vision. And how do you make sense of all of it?
So, how have you kind of created these filters, like if you're sifting all this data, right? I'm just thinking of like a sand, sifter, and you're trying to find the things that are important. Um, how have you, from a performance standpoint, how have you implemented these filters to have in place or to identify what really matters to you all? You mentioned about maybe starting smaller. Like, where did you
Mhm.
start? And over time, how has that evolved to where you're at now?
Yeah, and so I think about, just our field in general, right? Like in the human performance field. And I, as we think about it, like there's like what we coach, and then there's how we coach. And so data is really playing a role in both. It's like what are we coaching on, and how are we, creating, motivation and inspiration. And so, that's one perspective that I think's really important for anyone that's, thinking about incorporating more data into their experiences. And then from there, it's really thinking about, well, where does this data go? Like, how do we organize these elements of data? And so, we think about different categories. So, what is someone's foundational characteristics? What are their psychological drivers? What is their performance capacity? And we organize performance capacity into a series of qualities that we've identified into mindset, nutrition, movement, recovery. So, there are qualities in which we have in this model that we know will drive those aspects of performance capacity. Then we have the category of functional state. So neural, mechanical, metabolic, psychological stress. Like, how do you organize that? So, that's kind of what's happening in the human, right? Like, that's underneath the skin, that's everything with the human. So from there, how do you think about the environmental factors of what that human is actually doing out in the world? And, what is the natural environment? How is that impacting the human? And, then what are they actually doing? Which is what's turning into external load. And so then ultimately, how is that external load being captured? And then what is it doing as it turns back into internal load? So that's like, I mean, if we think about like how do you pull together all pieces of data from human performance, that was the first step in establishing that model. From there, we then start to prioritize and okay, like to drive our experiences, what are most critical? And so, on the movement side, from a performance capacity, speed development, movement quality, like what are those core qualities that we want to start with first? What can we actually capture? And then what can we actually make sense of? So that's been our approach and how we continue to build and take in more data. So lastly, I would say like we've done as we look at how we've stacked in the various data elements in which we're collecting today. We're doing a pretty good job on the performance capacity side in movement, in nutrition, and capturing those data points, a little bit in recovery. Uh, so we're kind of working with that data set now. And now we're moving into, how are we really quantifying and integrating that functional state data? So that's a big focus for us here in 2025.
It's a lot to chew on.
I know. It's like we can talk for hours just
You
about
saw,
the human performance model.
I think you saw me kind of laughing. You were talking about all these different things that go into it, but the reality is that is a human experience. Like that is what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, no matter who you are.
Absolutely. And you have to decide like, this will gives you the framework to really think about, well, what's important to collect? And so
Hmm.
what is that athlete or what is that individual like what do they really need to achieve to be a better performer and what's important to them and like what is their on-field performance need and so at that point it's like what do they need to develop and so is limb velocity something that's really critical is it lean body mass to bone mass ratio is that one really critical is it more of a mental load component is that critical and so it starts with the individual. What do they need to do to perform? What are their limiting factors? And then how do you program against that? And then how do you know that they're making progress along the way?
Right? Because even two slot receivers may need different things, right? Like
Yeah.
um, so is this all part of your onboarding process, or is this something that is, these data collected over time? Both, like how much of this is done on the front end? I'm a new wide receiver getting ready for the NFL Combine. I've heard of Exos. I'm ready to get started, and I'm showing up at your door day one. Like, what kind of testing am I going through, and what kind of data are you collecting right then and there?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a really great question, and we we struggle. We don't struggle with it. We're constantly on the quest of like
Sure,
what is too much. Like you don't like what's the right amount of data collection? What's too much? Like what becomes like totally annoying to people? And it's like,
definitely.
am I a research like am I in a research lab or am I training? And so you got to find the right blend. And I think there's some exciting stuff coming out that's making that collection even easier. And so, anyways, there's definitely a component of what needs to be measured up front that can kind of drive that first level of programming. But how might some of those you know data capture moments actually be happening like within the training sessions and within the experience themselves and in a future state, like with camera vision, just imagine like what could happen in the most passive way. So I think we're still a handful of years out from that, but it's coming. So, anyways, I think well, what do we look at really upfront for most of our athletes? We're looking at movement efficiency. We're looking at force velocity profiling in a couple of different dimensions. We're looking at movement skills. On the nutrition side, we're definitely looking at fuel utilization, nutrient profiles. We're DEXA scanning. We've got not just from a body comp standpoint, but we're really interested in bone to lean body mass ratios, and so those I would say are pretty consistent pieces that we're looking at. Our physical therapists are doing kind of their own realm of global movement type pattern assessment. So, that's the piece that we're pulling together at the baseline, and then certain things are monitored along the way. That's continuing to refine.
And I'm thinking about these different pillars you mentioned: nutrition, the functional space, psychology space, performance capacity. How do you create like common language and synergy amongst these different areas of services that you're providing to somebody? Because I think that's important, right? You want to have this consistent messaging across all these domains, right? So, um, those things that those department heads that are meeting and then filtering that stuff down, like how are you creating this common language amongst all of those areas?
Well, I think it's a critical piece. Everybody needs to be working off the same model, and so that's it is. We've spent the last 5 years ensuring that everybody in our org and especially in sport understands the model and is their like kind of frame of reference, their known truth. But there's twofold there. It's like what's happening as we're developing the programs, like what's happening as we are, coming up with what we feel is the athlete's game plan, and then what is the athlete experience on the other side. Like the athlete isn't going to see the terms, hey, like what are your foundational characteristics? You know what? I'm going to measure your performance capacity. No, like that's just all part of the athlete
Right.
experience. But our coaches and our practitioners, they understand those different components. And so, there are elements that are being collected by our dietitian. There are elements that are being collected by, our performance coaches. There are elements that are being collected by our PTs. And so, that's all coming into our data management system. And then, we continue to build. We're constantly building and evolving. But then, we have a series of dashboards that all of our practitioners can then look at and see this data and make decisions on the data and utilize the data to really influence the way that they are developing the programming. So getting the data into one place, visualizing that data accordingly, so all the practitioners are working with the same information. That's been a massive unlock. And so
Yeah.
breaking and getting the data out of silos, is creating a whole nother level of conversation right now, which will turn into a whole nother level of automated programming, kind of starter dough for practitioners in the future. So that's where we're heading.
You mentioned efficacy early on, obviously being really important. What's your process for auditing yourselves, to know that this is working? Because there's a combination of things that are objective, actual performance, let's say it's for an athlete, and then also like this component of athlete feedback of what their experience was like as well. Because you kind of want to, I imagine you try to combine both, right? Great experience with great results.
Yeah, yeah, you have to look at both sides, and it's really important. So on the experience side, we definitely capture that from our athletes, and we capture it from all parts of our business. So we want to understand the satisfaction that the athlete has with their practitioners, and we also want to understand what their net promoter score is. Like it's pretty, NPS is a pretty ubiquitous approach and methodology to to understand customer sentiment. So the athletes are our customers, and so we utilize NPS and kind of coach rating on those sides, and then the other side, it's speaking for themselves. But I think as we continue to refine, one of the things we're really thinking about and pushing ourselves on is, even if they, like, if their body comp improved, did they improve on the skills that they need as an athlete?
Mhm.
And so sometimes I think in the strength and conditioning field and the human performance field, we can get so locked into these concepts of performance capacity and these qualities. And are we changing these qualities? Did it translate onto the field? And so I think like that's a really important piece as well. And we see athletes in the off season, we're training them for, in such a different environment. So our translation there is, is their acceleration improving? Are they able to handle more load? Is their body recovering faster? So we can measure some of these on-field performance aspects, but if you worked for a team, you could really see how that translates into either more durability from an injury perspective, or better ability to manage that load over the course of the season from more of a performance aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of these areas, performance capacity, which you had mentioned limb velocity, um, innovation. I think that's where kind of we have this great overlap between the two organizations, between Kaiser and Exos, that we value both education, innovation, and then this aspect of performance capacity too. And I'm curious to hear from you a little bit about what the integration of maybe the new 400 line, 400 series has had on your ability to collect more meaningful data within that performance capacity space. and what that has done, or what maybe some of the feedback has been with athletes or coaches about the impact of that.
Yeah, no, it's the data that's been available with the 400 line. I think it's just it's so powerful, and like it's part that I'm so excited about, and I know like we're just scratching the surface on. And so that's what I'm most excited about in, the relationship that we have, and how we, how we get to learn from these living labs of Exos. But what we've seen just in this kind of first phase of the new equipment that we're utilizing, it's like, with the leg press and with the air squat, we've been, really pulling those, elements into the combine testing, and it's allowed us to really think about, how that directly impacts the programming, and how we've been able to think about, true work percentages. So that's been really cool. The velocity feedback, like from in session type of work, has also allowed coaches to make more real time decisions in the moment, as they see some of those changes, or see some of those detriments that maybe they weren't expecting. So that feedback is allowing for like real time changes. So that's been really, really cool. And as we're kind of understanding more about functional state and integrating that through, the data coming off of the 400 is also allowing us to give more real-time preciseness to what's happening in session. So I think that's the power there. You've got right left differences, you've got different elements of limb velocity, and then you've got this awesome experiential component for both the coach and the athlete within the session. And I think, I love the assessment stuff, but it's like it's those in session moments that create this really special point in time where you're creating adjustments, and the athlete knows that their programming is matching where they need to go and where they are right now, and the coach is able to do that, and that's transformative. Again, back to like, what are those Exos coaching principles? There's what you coach, and there's how you coach, and with this data being available, it really impacts both.
Yeah, well, I know we're really excited about it too, and kind of going back to the power of teams. I mean, I think having this partnership too is also, there's what we can do as Kaiser's company, there's what Exos can do, but I think having uh, being on the same team, I think really allows us to amplify what both organizations can do. And ultimately, like you said, at the end of the day, we're here to help engineer and improve human performance. And I'm really excited about that. I know we're really excited about that. So thank you for hitting on that. As you look ahead to human performance, the future, I know you're always looking at the future of work. How about the future of human performance? Are there any questions you're asking now that maybe you're not ready to go down with resources, but is there anything you're kind of asking or thinking about now? I mean, I know AI is obviously really important, and it's been in the news, but is there any questions you're asking now where you're like, maybe in 10 years, or um, maybe a little longer out?
Yes, like we're always asking questions. We have a parking lot of questions that we just can't quite get to. But I think you know if we start to put all these things together, kind of what are these areas that I think will transform over the next 5 to 10 years. I think speed development is a really interesting area of just kind of a new era. So as we can better understand acceleration, deceleration, as we understand differences in limb velocity, other velocity components, like our coaches and physical therapists are really fascinated right now about dissecting speed development in new ways. So that's an area that is really interesting to our coaches. And I again, like with more data available, how much more precise could we get with speed development? So to be determined on how that might actually impact, but I think that is an area that's really interesting right now. Um, I think in the moment. recommendations in coaching, like real time. What should I be doing? What is the action I need to take right now? Um, and not just from a training component, but like from a like, what do I need to do right now? What do I need to fuel with? What do I need to do from a regulation standpoint? Um, so I think that's another area that we're really passionate about, especially coming back to the data-driven coaching. All of these things are interconnected, and um, I think in 5 to 10 years, with the right modeling and the right parameterization of the data, there can be a world where the coaching that we are getting is based on our physiology as we understand it, not just right now, but like a rolling 7, a rolling 21, how this compares to last year or, 6 months ago. And so I think there's some really interesting things there around the so what, now what do I do, but the power of all the intersection of these different data sources.
That's great. Thank you. I think one of the things that I'm thinking about right now as you're speaking is thinking about the impact of the environment. And I imagine the answer is yes, you're always considering your athlete's experience and their environment. Do you think there's anything to the idea that maybe like we're going to rethink how athletes experience their environment or maybe reshape the actual training environment?
Ooh, like what are you thinking there?
Um,
Tell me more.
yeah. I'm thinking more about um, priming them to be in an environment that will allow them to perform at a high level. So I think there are a lot of training facilities now. And again, this is just a thought of mine. There's a lot of training facilities now where if you look across the board, a lot of them are really similar. Open turf space, um, racks, med ball walls, maybe a track outside. Um, a lot of them look really similar. Um, and I'm just curious if there's anything there about like, not saying that you have to be like in a forest or anything, but more like maybe biophilic environments, some more nature. Like, I don't even know really. Even walking into the facility, is there even it doesn't even have to be a biophilic thing, but like, is there, right when you walk through the front doors, then eventually walk down the hallway and come in, like, what are you really truly experiencing? And are we undervaluing maybe those aspects of the entire training experience? I mean, you talked about getting back, like deregulating. Like,
Uh-huh.
cool, you're leaving the building. Where are you going after this, and how is this impacting, your physiological state and your adaptation from your training session?
Have you gotten our paper around experiencing flow in facilities?
I,
I'd like to dig that one back up. No, I love where you're going with that. Like it
yeah,
is absolutely it is a detail that really isn't a detail. It's another strategic way that you can create a you know a, an external environment that is impacting a human's internal environment. So we actually we did some of this work. I'm going to go back and pull the paper. But when we were thinking about some new facility designs, and we were working on it with our senior director of neuroscience, Dr. Chris Bertram, and there are things that can happen. And so, the concept of a tunnel and like what does like focused eye vision do for priming for flow? Like what do different colors do? Like what do different textures do? There are all of these different layers that I think what we're getting at. I thought you were going to go somewhere different, but I think it's an interesting aspect to how can the environment, as we're talking about it right now, shift what's happening above the neck. And so like so much of the med ball and all the pneumatic equipment and all the tools that are available are primarily designed. I mean, the brain and body are inextricably linked, but they're mainly like helping our physical body be able to create more force, manage more load. But how might the training environment actually fulfill a different neurochemical need in the brain? I think that was, yes, I think so.
Just a thought. I'm excited to see. I mean, I just think so much. I've been at a bunch of different facilities, and it's very common. I mean, part of it is life too. These are human beings that have lives outside of this. This is part of our society and how we commute and things like that. And I'm just thinking about it. Seems very similar. Like everybody, park, you walk in, you sit down on like a bench, you put your shoes on, you kind of get ready for the session. Like, is there just a way to maybe stop and think of like, okay, we can be doing this better, you know?
You can, I think, it's a great point, and it's, what we're, what you're about, what we're about,
Yeah.
and how do you engineer experiences so that humans can reach new levels of performance? And that starts from the physical experience in which they are entering in and working within, and what role does that play in the actual work itself that we know is designed to create adaptation and higher levels of performance. So you heard it here first, Gabe. Next frontier,
Yeah, right.
intentional design.
All right, I got three quick questions for you, some fun ones just to wrap up here as
Okay,
we
go for
finish
it.
up. So, for you, what does your own training look like right now? Like when you finally get some time to train, what does it look like?
Okay, so I'm preparing for a mountain bike race. I'm in the race mode. So I'm going to do a race at the end of April. So I'm kind of in that mode. So starting to ramp up some mileage, but also not neglecting the strength. But when I think about, gosh, when is Amanda? When she's firing on all cylinders. I've got my cold plunge incorporated. I got my strength training 3 to 4 times a week. I'm on my bike, and I was a gymnast. I just love my Pilates reformer. It makes me feel like I'm playing. So I'm hitting that in the basement at least twice a week.
I like it. Any TV series or show that you're watching right now, maybe even embarrassed to say that you're watching that you kind of like to watch, or anything that is catching your eye right now?
I have a problem because like I've kind of run out of shows. I am probably like so many other people. I love all the Taylor Sheridan shows. Like I just love them. We just finished up Landman. I thought that was great. Lioness, I love that. But okay, I'll admit it. I somehow found this show. It's called Younger, and I have no idea why I was so like into it. Maybe it's because I'm getting older, but I seriously binge watched that like crazy. I had the flu a couple weeks ago, and I could not function. But Younger got me through, and then I was obsessed. So, Younger, I
Okay.
guess, is the embarrassing one.
Yeah, I knew there was something there.
Yeah.
All right, cool. And then last one, favorite food spot, casual food spot, either around work or in the Phoenix area.
Oh my gosh, Phoenix is such a foodie place. That is impossible to really think about. There's an awesome place right by our house. It's definitely more kind of hole in the wall, but it's called Lovecraft, and it's really awesome. They've got great like New Mexican type food. So Lovecraft. Then I also gotta throw in another kind of old school Phoenix favorite, and it's called the Rokery. So I love the Rokery.
All right. I knew you were good for at least one of those. So I appreciate it. Well, Amanda, thank you so much, the Chief Performance Innovation Officer at Exos, for joining me on the Kaiser Human Performance podcast. For those listening, please, please, please do yourself a favor. Follow Exos on Instagram. We have team_Exos. We have Exos Education and Exos Sports. Also, be sure to check out www.teamexos.com for those amazing resources and education opportunities that Amanda had mentioned. So much great content on there, as well as some certification courses available. So, Amanda, thanks again. Thank you so much for being here and spending the time with me today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Gabe. It was a lot of fun.
You got it. Talk soon.